Hey YouTube, it's Dimitri, and today we're going to answer a subscriber's question. So Abstract Schnitzel is asking here, you seem very well-rounded in general. This may be something that comes with age, but I'm curious as to where you learned so much from. Was all of this stuff you learned about the economy from your master's in applied economics, or is it stuff you self-learned? I would like to become well-rounded and learn more about things like this, but I don't know how or where to learn. It seems like news on either side is biased, so I don't know where to go for objective truth. So this is an excellent question and something I have thought about now for a few days, as this question was asked 7 days ago, as you can see right here. So for me, it's always been about first principles, and I never knew it was called, first principles, but really building ideas and theory up from the core basic foundational principles and then layering on top of them other truths and trying to connect the dots to build kind of a solid, like a pyramid as an example here, where it's all built on a solid foundation. The reason I say this is I often find students, politicians, industry practitioners, people in general, they like to listen to things and then they take an opinion on it and they never stop to connect the dots on okay, I have this belief system, I have these facts, how do I connect these facts and how do I build an idea up to see if something makes sense or not. It's often and I'm definitely guilty of this as well. You'll have your phone out and you'll be watching like a news article or something, and they're talking a lot about, this and this and this is happening and this is the solution. And you're listening and you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I completely agree with that. And then I often find myself taking a step back and thinking but why? Right? Why do I agree with that? It's really easy to say, okay, this fits into my, ideology. This fits into my opinions. This fits into maybe something I know, but how does it fit into what I know here? And so for economics, I think economics is probably one of the worst fields ever to exist in the sense of a social aspect, meaning everybody has an opinion on it, but hardly anybody actually studies it. And even those that study it, for some reason, get very biased into specific camps of I must learn A or I must learn B. And even when they are taught something and they agree with it, if political parties or different ideology groups inside the economic community disagree or come up with some idea, it's often everybody dives onto that and just follows it blindly because, to be honest, I don't think many people start from the first principles, meaning the things that we know are true, and then trying to abstract upward into more comprehensive thoughts here. So a few takeaways from that. One, the bias piece, trying to analyze why you agree with things. And two is really just building off those first principles. And I'll give you an example here. There was an article of an individual on LinkedIn that they wrote, and they talked about, I went to the US, I got an MBA, and they taught me how to maximize profits and do all this, businessy stuff. And I went back home to my home country of India, and I saw this, old Indian woman on the side of the road. And I went and I asked her, why don't you sell, you're selling tea, and you're trying to make a few dollars to survive. Why not sell this type of cookie or dessert thing that went with it? You could really grow your business and provide more offerings to individuals, right? I mean, you could sell more things and you could be more profitable and better yourself. And the old woman replied to the student, and they told him, oh, I don't sell those cookies because, the guy next to me, he's selling those cookies. And so if I were to do that, it would put him out of business. And so my first knee-jerk reaction to this is the students trying to say oh, this is something that they learned in an MBA is how to maximize profits, but it doesn't teach you how to be a good person. And essentially there's more to life than making money. And so in my head, my first knee-jerk reaction is this student's wrong. Obviously, this is just complete nonsense. And I know it's wrong, right? It's wrong. And then I had to think about it. I was but there's a point. There's a point to the story, right? It does sound good on the surface. It sounds like he's right. We shouldn't maximize profits here, right? This is evil and nasty and bad. And we want both of these people to make a living and to be able to survive. And so I sat and I thought about it. And I was actually framing on my garage project out here with a hammer, and I was framing these nails up at 12 feet with the lumber everywhere, and I'm hanging off of this. And I'm thinking why don't I agree with this? And it's not so clear why I disagreed with this. And so I thought about it more and more and more. And then I realized because they're missing so many other facts and so much more information. And in my head, my little snarky voice is saying you should have asked for a refund for your MBA because you didn't obviously learn too much. But for me, I started thinking it would make sense. She should sell those cookies. Why? Because then she would make more money and she would be better off. The piece that snags you is, what about the other individual? What about that man? Well, to agree with the story, you have to come up with the assumption that man, the only skill he has in life is making those cookies. His labor is worth nothing. There's nothing else he could do, right? He's only a cookie maker. That's it. You have to agree with that premise. I don't agree with that premise. And that is why I don't agree with the student. And why is because you're right. If she made amazing cookies, let's say they were better than the guy's cookies next to her, and she had amazing tea, people would buy it. Well, one, the consumer is going to benefit more than they were before, because now instead of getting really good tea and mediocre cookies, they're going to get really good tea and really good cookies. And it's all going to come conveniently at one store, one location. The second piece of this is that individual, I believe, has other skills and other abilities. He's not going to just make cookies, right? He could go off and make something else and sell it there. Or maybe he decides he wants to go get a job and work for somebody else doing something for them, right? So he needs to do that. You're bettering the customer, you're bettering that lady, and then the third party is going to do this guy. Now, another scenario to this on a business perspective is maybe that lady makes the best tea and cookies, and they're so good that she grows and doubles or triples her business. But when she does that, she can't afford to do it anymore, right? She does not have the resources to maybe grow. Maybe she needs financial support. Maybe that guy could come work for her, right? Maybe he could help make the cookies. Maybe he could provide a little bit of financing. Maybe they could team up and make even better business, right? But you have to start thinking about this through that lens of, why do I disagree with this? Why does it not make sense? And then really think about the consequences of it and why. And there's been ideas and things that have bugged me before, and I've jumped on to one reaction and I've thought about it for some time and realized I'm wrong, right? There are these other facts that played into this. And then you start working through your head again. Why? Why do these things make sense? So from an economic perspective, though, the first principles for me that I recommend everyone start at is to read The Wealth of Nations, the original book, the full book that was written in 1776. There are a bunch of super speedy, thin versions of it. And I hear students all the time say, oh, I've read The Wealth of Nations, and oh, I know all this. And they jump to conclusions too quickly. And then I pull out my really, it's a small book. It's not really big, but it's super thick. I think it's 1,300 pages or something ridiculous. And it's in Old English, which makes it tedious and hard to read. But if you read that book, for me, that is the Bible of economics. And you have to realize Adam Smith, when he wrote this book and it was published in 1776, there were no schools of thoughts. There were not these well-developed Austrian economists and Keynesian economists and, neoclassical and classical. And there wasn't camps set at that time. He's literally just going through intellectually. And amazingly so, he's done an excellent job at laying the foundation, which is why he's considered to be one of the fathers of economics, if not the father of economics. And he's done an amazing job at doing it. And even when I learned through school, so I took these classes, I disagreed with a lot of what was being taught. So I went to the University of Michigan for applied economics. I don't agree with a lot of the Keynesian ideology that they teach, which is really trendy and popular in universities across the country. For example, why do you teach economics as micro and macro? Is it two topics? I mean, something to think about there for you guys. But starting with those foundations, when I read that book, a lot of the ideas and different concepts that were so-called invented or founded by a different economist 100 years later were things he actually discusses in The Wealth of Nations. And so I feel like from his perspective on a first principle basis, that is the best place to start here. Now, again, I do this with almost every topic. I try to go back and find old original thinkers, and I try to figure out, for example, I enjoy psychology. And so I tried to read things by Freud and by Carl Jung and different psychologists from way back when, because it provides me a historic foundation of this is how the world was. This is how we viewed things. And then once I understand that, then I start to read other, authors or other perspectives. And I start to say, okay, right. There was Freud and everything. And then everybody today thinks he's a crazy nut job. And then you start asking the question, why? Why do people think Freud was crazy? What pieces has he actually contributed though that have carried over that we still follow? Or why did he come to the conclusions he came to? And I think that's an interesting point when you try to start at the beginning of things, right? It's easier to start at the beginning of history and try to build your way forward. And building at the beginning of history is not necessarily going to be a first principle, but it will kind of give you a foundational starting point and help evolve your thinking, I think, more in a logical manner across a large period of time. And when you do this, it typically pulls out the biases because, as you're pointing out here, especially with economics, there are financial incentives for people to have different ideas and thoughts. And often they don't realize it and they say, oh, no. I don't represent this party or that party, and I'm an economist. And then yet magically all of their ideology or the majority of them line up with a political party. And then, of course, they're actually, whining and dining and getting paid by a lot of politicians, especially famous economists in the US today. So there's always going to be a bias in the fact that their news, their risk and rewards, their opinions are very short-lived, right? It's a very small snippet of time. When you start to study things in a far broader perspective as well, that gives you a wider range of historical events, and it gives you kind of you can see the trends and the patterns and try to, pull out what is truth, what is opinion, and what is just complete lies for a variety of reasons on that. So those are kind of things to look at and to think about. And then a few more points here is going to be looking at opposing views, which I know some people find distasteful, but I actually try to read things that are just like things I know I'm not going to agree with, right? I already know I agree on a perspective. I've built what I consider my first principles, but I always have in the back of my mind, I could always be wrong. Something I might think is a first principle might not be a first principle, or maybe I had an idea and it works, but it only works in one scenario. So reading other perspectives. So for example, if you watch the news, like on economic views, try to find different sources that you know are going to be biased one way or another, and then try to go find another source that is a different bias on a similar topic and kind of read them together, and then take the time to think, which I think a lot of people don't do. They just want you to spoon feed you like a really nice, easy solution. But really think about why you agree, why you don't agree, how it aligns with different things you've read, and really try to connect those dots on how everything fits together. So that's kind of how I've gotten the well-roundedness. And of course, age is a huge factor in here as well. I would have told you it made no impact when I was probably in my 20s. Even like in grad school, I'd be like, oh, no. Like, I'm really mature to understand this. But with age just comes more life experiences. I think there's a part of you that kind of moves away. So when I was quite a bit younger, I was, one of those crazy kids focused on making an amazing career and making a lot of money. And, finance and business was the king of everything. And I was going to be like, I don't know, all these ridiculous things you think about. And I was always a little bit different than most of the students, like the traditional frat bros that go into finance, which has a bad connotation, and it still does. I was kind of the more reserved person, but I always had really strong opinions. And as I've gotten older and older, I've really stopped and tried to think about things before speaking. So if I don't have an expertise or a really strong opinion on something that needs to be said, I just try not to say it. So even on this channel, right, I've been kind of mixing in a little bit of things like on ESG and a little bit of things on like economics, for example, but I'm not trying to be like the ESG channel or trying to be the channel that's, one way or another way. And part of that is I just don't like the arguments of it. And the other part is it would take me a long time to really explain things out in detail. In reality, I just don't care about everyone else's opinions that are whining and complaining. And that's just a challenge in itself, dealing with that on a channel that's supposed to be focused on careers in quantitative finance. But another point with this is trying to, put data together too. I see a lot of charts and a lot of, I'll put information in air quotes here, that are just lies that people have either just made up out of thin air or they've misleadingly adjusted scales. And again, the age piece I think comes in here with having the expertise and the age to know that I know this chart looks like super convincing and I want to know where the data came from. And then I use my statistical background and years of modeling experience to start thinking about if my goal was to get their point across, how would I do it? And then I start realizing things like, oh, you shorten the time frames, or you build a model and say that the model is great, but you have a bunch of violations of statistical assumptions, or you fudge things in your data and you lie, cheat, and steal basically to get the chart that you want. And of course I threw out some outliers, but magically they're outliers that disagreed with me. And so now my conclusion makes sense. A lot of these things happen. It's really odd too, because when you talk to people that have written these, or you talk to university professors, for example, they're so sold on their idea that even when things are brought up that are fraudulent or issues, they throw them out as like anecdotal evidence, and then yet you keep seeing the same odd circle of like lie after lie after lie. But I think if you can really focus again on those core foundations of different topics you're learning, try to apply logic and different sets of data to it, you'll eventually start coming to a more well-rounded view. And also, my final point here, at least this is my perspective, I try to view the world as individually as possible and ignore groups and groupthink. Yes, that's what models do. They group people of likeness together, and that's how we model things. But I think it's important to look at the world from an individual perspective. So I'm a libertarian politically. I guess you'd consider me Austrian economics. I just view economics as economics, but people often label me as an Austrian economist. And again, I try to look at things from a freedom individual perspective here. So you might say country A is bad and country A has done horrible things to its people. But then a lot of people will draw a conclusion and say those sorts of people, meaning people from that country, are horrible, nasty, mean people. When the reality is there's probably a lot of people from that country that don't necessarily agree with their government or don't agree with the social construct of their country. And so, trying to take everybody at an individual basis, it wears on you. It takes a lot out of you to really step back and do that. But I think it's a critical point when you listen to other individuals, conversations, is trying to listen to what they have to say and not taking that bias of like, I don't like you because you come from another ideological background or another culture or another country, realizing that individuals themselves are very unique. And I think that is one thing that we see actually dying today in the United States and a lot of the Western world. We're trying to make everybody the same. We're trying to make everybody fit into categories. And if I don't like your category, then I'm not happy about it. And I don't like you and I don't listen to any of your other opinions. And I think that's real damaging because individuals might have ideas you even disagree with and you find disgusting, but they also might have excellent points in different areas of different topics that you might not have thought of. So trying to weigh everybody at an individual perspective will actually help you, I think, develop your perspective a little bit better as well. It will help kind of reduce that biasness even from yourself. So anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And as always, until next time.